Has anyone ever told you that life truly begins at 40? Well, sometimes it starts at 64. My name is Beth. I am 69 years old. And the story I'm about to tell you will sound like one of those movies you watch and think, this could never really happen. But it did happen. Every word, every tear, every moment of courage you're about to hear happened to me 5 years ago. I know many people say pain fades with time, that absence teaches us lessons, that silence brings peace to the soul. But, to be honest, those people have never been disregarded by their own family. They've never tasted the bitterness of discovering that the person who was supposed to protect them was quietly plotting to push them out. Let me tell you something I've carried inside for years. Something that taught me that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who share your roof, eat at your table, and call you mom with a smile on their face. For 45 years, I was just Beth, and wife of Anthony, the owner of a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of Cleveland, Ohio. I was the mother of Danielle, the daughter we raised with all our love and sacrifice. I was the grandmother who baked cornbread for the kids and always kept an extra plate ready for anyone who stopped by. That's who I was when I turned 64. A simple woman in slippers and a floral apron, sweeping the porch every morning before the sun fully rose. Neighbors knew they could knock on my door anytime. Mrs. Miller, at number 47, often stopped by for a little sugar. Mr. Doc Johnson from the corner would pause for a cup of coffee after work. That was my everyday rhythm. Coffee brewed in an old filter, and rich and strong enough to fill the house with its aroma from 5 a.m. The kitchen was the heart of the home. A blue formica table with chairs Anthony had repaired himself. A gas stove over 20 years old that still worked perfectly. A small fridge that was always full. On the wall hung a calendar from a local pharmacy and a few family pictures, Danielle as a child in her father's arms, our wedding photo, and the grandkids when they were little. I loved weekends. Saturdays were for baking cornbread. Sundays, after church at 8 a.m. The whole family gathered for lunch. Danielle came with Richard and the children. I made my famous roast chicken, a hearty plate of stuffing, and fluffy white rice. The table was always alive with laughter and conversation, but everything changed after my Anthony passed away. Oh, Anthony, the man of few words, but big gestures. Every day, he rose at 5 a.m., drank the coffee I had ready, and went to the shop. In the evening, he came back with grease-stained hands, smelling of engines, but always smiling at me. Old lady, how was your day? He'd ask, kissing my forehead before washing up. Anthony was an old-school man. He handled the bills, the payments, and never let the house go without. I knew he had saved some money for emergencies, but I never worried about it because I trusted him completely. In 45 years of marriage, he never let me down. When his heart disease worsened, I cared for him like a lioness guarding her cubs, sleepless nights. Medicine on time. Doctor visits so expensive, we had to sell a few things to cover them. At least that's what I thought at the time. Then Anthony left me on a Tuesday morning. He fell asleep in my arms and never woke up again. The doctor said his heart was tired, that he passed peacefully. But my heart shattered. The first months were truly hard. The house felt too big, the silence suffocating. I talked to myself just to hear a voice. I kept the radio on in the kitchen and pretended someone was there to talk to. Neighbors helped, of course. Mrs. Miller sometimes brought food. Mr. Johnson still stopped by for coffee. Though now, it was just me sitting at the table. That's when Danielle started visiting more often. At first, I thought it was my daughter's love. Genuine care for her mother. She came at least twice a week. Always with Richard. They brought a few bags, saying they'd pick things up for me on their way. Mom, are you doing okay? Danielle would ask, hugging me tightly, the hug I'd missed for so long. Are you eating well? Not cutting corners too much? Richard would always nod along with his wife. A sharp-looking man, working at an accounting firm. Always dressed neatly, speaking smoothly, but his smile never truly inspired my trust. How can I explain it? It was like the smile of a salesman, always trying to convince you of something. Their visits became more frequent. Every Sunday they came for lunch as before. But now the conversations had changed. Everything revolved around my health, my ability to manage the house, and the dangers of a woman my age living alone. Mom, don't you notice you've been more forgetful? Danielle asked with concern. Last time, you forgot where you put your glasses. And the week before, you forgot to turn off the stove after lunch. Of course, I objected, saying everyone forgets sometimes, that it's normal. But they kept pressing. Richard nodded knowingly, as if he were an expert. Mrs. Beth, he said, we're truly worried about you. This house is big, with stairs and a large yard. What if something happened at night? Who would hear you call for help, bit by bit? The conversations steered straight to the point. Danielle began suggesting it might be better if I had companions, people my age to talk to. Richard added in comments about safety and having someone care for me around the clock. You deserve to rest, Mrs. Beth, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. You've done so much for us. You raised Danielle while Mr. Anthony worked so hard. You kept the family together and managed the house. Now, it's time to take care of yourself. And then they started bringing brochures. I remember the first time clearly. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon. After lunch, we were sitting in the living room having coffee when Danielle pulled a stack of papers out of her bag. Mom, we've done some research and found a few good options for you. She opened the folder and began showing me the colorful brochures. Look how beautiful this place is. They were nursing homes. But of course, they didn't call them nursing homes. Senior living communities, retirement residences, community homes. Pretty names to cover up the truth. A place to put away old people. The brochures showed pictures of smiling people playing cards, exercising, eating in neat dining halls. There were pools, gardens, TV rooms, medical rooms. Everything was spotless, orderly, and so fake. Look, Mom, isn't it great? You'll have friends, activities, nothing to worry about anymore, Danielle said, flipping through the glossy pages. And it's right nearby, we can visit you all the time. Richard added, this is the best place in the Cleveland area. Mrs. Beth, on-site doctors, professional nurses, balanced meals. You'll live like a queen. Every time they showed me those pictures, a chill went down my spine. Those smiling people looked like actors in a margarine commercial. And me, I didn't want to become an actress in my own life. But I'm fine at home, I answered. I have my things, my routines, my neighbors. Mom, but what if you fall? What if you get sick in the middle of the night? You're isolated here. Nobody to help you. I have you too. Of course you have us. But we have jobs, responsibilities. We can't watch you 24 hours a day. The weeks passed and the pressure kept growing. Every visit brought another reason, another worry, another suggestion to leave my home. They talked about maintenance costs, about how hard it was to manage a big house, about the dangers of the neighborhood. Then came the light bulb incident. It was a Thursday afternoon. The bulb in the living room burned out, and I went to replace it, something I'd done for decades without a problem. I took the stool from the kitchen, carefully climbed up, removed the old bulb. But when I stepped down, the leg of the stool slipped on the rug. I lost my balance and fell. Nothing serious, Just a bruise on my right arm and a scare. I got up myself, put the stool away, and replaced the bulb using a sturdier chair. But the next day, when Danielle came over, I told her about it. I thought it was just a normal part of the day. But her reaction was as if I'd narrowly escaped a fatal accident. "Mom, you could have broken your neck." She started crying. "What if you'd hit your head? What if you'd passed out? Who would have found you, honey?" It was just a slip. A small one. A small one, don't you see? This is a sign. God is showing you it's no longer safe for you to live alone. Richard arrived in the middle of the conversation and, hearing about it, shook his head as if he had expected this all along. "I told you, Danielle. I said this would happen." He looked at me knowingly. "Mrs. Beth, you were lucky this time. But what about next time?" That night, after they left, I sat alone in the living room staring at the kitchen stool. Could they be right? Could I really no longer take care of myself? I started noticing things I'd ignored before. The stairs to the second floor felt steeper. The living room rug really did slip sometimes. The front gate was starting to feel heavy when locking it. In the following weeks, the pressure became relentless. Danielle called every day asking how I was, if I'd fallen, if I was eating properly. Richard began dropping by on his own, always with some excuse. "Just passing by. Wanted to see if you needed anything from the store. Mrs. Beth." He'd sit in Anthony's armchair. "You're a smart woman. You know, we just want what's best for you." "I know, Richard." "Then you understand this can't go on. We're always worried. Can't focus on work. Can't sleep thinking about you alone here." He always spoke gently, like a father or an uncle. But behind those words, there was something that unsettled me. A pressure I couldn't name. And in one of those conversations, he let slip a sentence that startled me. "Have you thought about what's going to happen to this house when you're no longer here? It would be better to settle everything while you're still of sound mind." Sound mind. Why would he say that I was perfectly lucid? Making my own decisions. Managing my own life, but weeks of constant pressure were starting to take effect. I began to wonder. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was a burden. Maybe I was being selfish, wanting to stay in my own home with my things, my memories, my freedom. If it was making my family worry. One night, looking at Anthony's pictures around the house, I suddenly thought, what would you do? Old man, would you push me out too? It was October when I began seriously considering the idea. Danielle and Richard brought more paperwork, this time with prices, payment plans, even photos of the room I would have, just for a while. "Mom," Danielle said, "you'll like it. And if it's not a good fit, we'll talk again." But who leaves a place like that? Who comes back that October night? Nearly 6 months after Anthony's passing, I was almost convinced. Almost ready to accept that my independent life was over. Almost believing that at 64, I had nothing left to live for. Only to exist under the care of strangers. Almost. But sometimes, fate has other plans. Sometimes, when you're about to give up on yourself, life gives you a sign. A discovery. A revelation that changes everything. And that's exactly what happened to me on a Saturday afternoon, when I decided to clean out Anthony's old room before I might move. A discovery that not only revealed the secrets my husband had kept for decades, but also exposed the true intentions of the people I trusted most in the world. You know those moments in life that split everything into before and after? Well, that Saturday afternoon was exactly that moment for me. If someone had told me that morning that before the sun went down, I would discover secrets my husband had hidden for years, I would have laughed. Anthony had always been transparent with me, or at least that's what I thought. That day was late October. One of those strangely hot days before winter in Cleveland, Ohio. Sunlight streamed through the window of our bedroom now, just mine, and lit up the wooden dresser Anthony had bought in our second year of marriage. A simple piece, built to last a lifetime. With 3 large drawers and a mirror speckled with age. I had decided to sort through his clothes. I couldn't keep living with his shirts still hanging in the closet. Carrying the scent of him in every fiber. The smell of laundry soap. Cheap cologne. And that unique scent every person has. You know when you hug someone and, with your eyes closed, you can recognize them by their smell alone. That's how it was with my Anthony. I started with his shirts. I folded each one carefully, remembering him wearing them to work. The light blue one he always wore to Sunday church. The red plaid one, his favorite for staying home. The white shirt for special occasions, now yellowed at the collar with time. Some I set aside to donate. The rest, the ones tied to special memories, I placed in a box and put on the top shelf. I wasn't ready to let go of everything that was left of him. But when I reached the drawers of the wooden dresser, that afternoon took an entirely different turn. The first drawer was predictable underwear. Socks. T-shirts, things any wife knows by heart after 45 years of marriage. The second held personal documents, his ID card, driver's license, a few old prescriptions, papers from a simple life. Nothing surprising. But the third drawer was jammed tight. I pulled once, twice, 3 times, nothing. It seemed something was stuck inside. I figured it was just humidity. That drawer always got sticky on hot days. But when I finally opened it, I heard a strange sound, like something shifting at the bottom. The drawer was almost empty. Just a few of Anthony's underthings I'd forgotten to pack away. But when I removed them, I noticed the bottom panel was loose at one corner. Curious. I gently pulled the wood. And right then, I found a brown envelope sealed with tape. Hidden in a secret compartment I never knew existed. My name was written in my husband's unmistakable handwriting, to my Beth. Only open if something happens to me. My hands trembled as I held the envelope. It was heavy. Inside were many papers. I sat down on the bed, the very bed we had shared for so many years. Where he had given me his last kiss. Where I had woken alone so many mornings since he passed. I slowly opened the envelope, almost afraid of what I was about to see. Inside was a 3-page handwritten letter, penned in Anthony's neat, careful script, and a stack of folded documents. I started with the letter. Of course I did. My dearest Beth. The first line read, "If you're reading this, it means I've gone before I could tell you about what I've been quietly building for us all these years. Please forgive me for keeping this secret. But I only wanted to protect you. And most of all, protect what belongs to us. Protect me from what I know. You've always thought our family was just a simple one, with little to our name. And for a long time, that was true. But since the auto shop started doing better about 20 years ago, I've been saving every extra dollar. Not in the bank. Beth, you know I never trusted those places. I saved by investing in things solid. Things with real value. 20 years. He had secured our financial safety for 2 decades, and I hadn't known. Do you remember those Saturdays I said I was going to look at some plots of land outside Akron? It wasn't just curiosity. Old lady. Those were parcels I was buying. One by one. Always paying in full to avoid interest or trouble. We now own 5 parcels out there. All going up in value. 5 parcels outside Akron. Anthony had quietly been buying land without telling me. And those times you thought I was lending money to friends? It wasn't loans. Beth. That was money I invested in small businesses around here. Mr. Johnson's bakery expanded thanks to my share. Mrs. Carter's salon did too. They send me a cut of the profits every month. Not a lot. But together, it makes a decent income. Investing in businesses. My husband was an investor. And I'd thought he was just helping friends out of kindness. But the biggest surprise? My dearest Beth, is in the papers included with this letter, the apartment building on Carnegie Avenue, right downtown. The one you always admired whenever we passed it on the bus. It's ours. Beth. I bought it 10 years ago when the owner needed cash fast. 6 units. All rented, including the one Danielle and Richard are living in. For a moment my heart stopped. That building was ours. Danielle was paying rent to her own parents without even knowing it. I know you're wondering why I didn't tell you sooner. I just wanted to be sure everything was running smoothly first. I planned to tell you at the right time. But when my illness got worse, I couldn't bring myself to burden you with more. Tears streamed down my cheeks. I couldn't tell if it was grief that he'd passed without telling me, or joy that I wasn't the penniless widow I'd believed myself to be. One more thing. Beth. And this is the most important. I don't trust Richard, Danielle's husband. I know you like him. You think he's polite and attentive. But I've noticed too much. He asks too many questions about our finances, the house, our assets, questions no son-in-law should be asking. Beth. It gives me chills. Our daughter is blind with love. But you see more clearly. Richard asking about our finances sent a cold shiver down my spine. If one day someone tries to convince you that you can no longer care for yourself, tries to push you out of this house, or make you believe you're a burden to the family, remember what's written in this letter. Use it to protect yourself. My old lady, you're stronger than you think, and wealthier than they could ever imagine. Never let anyone make you feel small or powerless. You raised a wonderful daughter, cared for a home for decades, and loved me with all your heart for a lifetime. If all of that isn't proof that you can handle anything, then I don't know what is. The letter ended this way. All documents have been updated, notarized. Everything arranged so there will be no problems. Attorney Henry on Euclid Avenue knows the entire situation. He's the one who helped me organize it all. If you need anything, go to him. I will always love you. Anthony. By the time I finished reading, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the stack of papers. I opened the folder that came with the letter and nearly fainted. Property deeds for the land outside Akron, 5 parcels. All in my name. Partnership contracts with small local businesses. Statements for a savings account I never knew existed, with nearly $200,000 in it. And finally, the ownership documents for the building on Carnegie Avenue. 6 apartments. 6 families paying rent to me every month, including my own daughter. I sank to the bedroom floor, surrounded by the papers, struggling to take it all in. I was not the poor widow I had thought. I was a landowner, a shareholder, with money in the bank. Realistically, I was a wealthy woman. But even more staggering than the size of the fortune was what it meant for my life now. Danielle and Richard weren't worried about my health or happiness. What they wanted was my estate. They were trying to shove me into a nursing home to take this house, the one thing they believed I owned. They had no idea about the fortune Anthony had quietly built over decades. I thought back to the conversations of the past weeks, the constant pressure, the hints that I was helpless, the talk about what would happen to the house when I was gone. Richard questioning my sound mind. Danielle talking about safety. Both planting the thought that I was a burden. Now it was clear. They wanted me out of the way so they could grab what they thought was my only asset, this house. But they had no clue. I was sitting on a fortune beyond their imagination. That Saturday afternoon, cleaning out my husband's room, I hadn't just uncovered the financial secrets he'd kept for decades. I had also seen the true nature of the people I loved most. And more than that, I realized something about myself at 64. I was not weak or dependent. No matter what they wanted me to believe, Anthony was right. I was stronger than I thought, and now, with the truth in my hands, it was time to prove it. I gathered all the documents into a folder and hid it deep in the closet behind the winter clothes. Then I went back to the kitchen and brewed a pot of strong coffee. I needed to think. to plan. Because one thing was certain, this discovery had changed everything. And Danielle and Richard had no idea what was coming. 2 days later, on Monday morning, they showed up again. This time, with more paperwork for the nursing home and even a move-in date already set. But this time I was ready. This time, I knew exactly who was sitting in my living room. And what I had realized about myself that day wasn't just going to change the course of my life, it was going to decide all of our fates. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in a negotiation is the one everyone underestimates. And sometimes, discovering your true self is the strongest weapon you'll ever have. Have you ever had to pretend you didn't know a truth that could upend everything? Ever had to smile at people who thought they were fooling you? While you saw through every move they were making. That was exactly how I lived those 2 days after finding Anthony's secret. 2 days pretending to be weak. Confused old Beth. 2 days preparing for the most important confrontation of my life. That Monday morning, when the doorbell rang, I knew exactly who was outside. Danielle and Richard had called the night before, saying they needed to stop by to discuss some important matters. I knew exactly what those were. I opened the door. There was my daughter holding a folder, her face set like she was about to handle something difficult. Richard wore his usual salesman's smile, neatly dressed in pressed slacks, a crisp shirt, and polished shoes. "Hi, Mom." Danielle kissed my cheek. "Did you sleep well?" "I did. Honey, want some coffee? I just brewed a fresh pot." "Of course, Mrs. Beth," Richard answered, stepping into the house like he owned it. "You know I love your coffee." I went to the kitchen for the cups while they settled in the living room. I could hear them whispering, though I couldn't make out the words. I came back with a tray of steaming coffee, yesterday's cornbread, a jar of sugar, and a pitcher of milk. A familiar scene. The kind of hospitality I'd offered for decades. Except this time, I knew I was serving coffee to the very people who wanted me gone. "Mom," Danielle began once everyone had poured their cups. "We came today because it's time to make a decision." "What decision is that?" Dear Richard leaned forward, his voice sweet. That caring tone I now knew was nothing but a facade. "Mrs. Beth, do you remember the retirement community we talked about? Well, we've discussed it thoroughly, done our research, and found the perfect place for you." Danielle opened the folder and pulled out a spread of colorful papers, floor plans, photos of the facility, price sheets. "Look, Mom, this is Greenwood Senior Living. It's in Shaker Heights. A beautiful area with lots of trees. You'll have your own apartment, a bathroom with safety features, an emergency call button, and the best part," Richard added, "is they have medical staff on duty, 24/7. If you ever feel sick, fall, or forget your medicine, there will always be someone to help." They spoke as if they were pitching some expensive product. They laid out glossy photos of beautifully decorated rooms, community lounges full of smiling people, and carefully manicured gardens. "Mom, we already went to see it in person. It's truly beautiful. And guess what? They just happen to have a vacancy right now." "What a coincidence," I whispered, sipping my coffee. "Exactly, and even better. They're running a special promotion for new residents. If you sign today, the first few months will be at a reduced rate." Richard pulled a fancy gold-plated fountain pen from his pocket, the kind executives use to sign big contracts. "All you have to do is sign here. Mrs. Beth, we'll take care of the rest. Moving any belongings you want to bring. Canceling the house bills. Everything." "Canceling the bills?" I asked. "Fining innocence." "That's right. Mom, since you'll be living at the senior home, you won't need this house anymore. We can sell it. Use the money to cover the nursing fees. and still have plenty left over to keep you financially secure. Ah. So that was it. They wanted me to sign away my home so they could sell it. And how much do you think this house is worth? I asked. Danielle and Richard exchanged a glance, that quick look people give each other right before they lie about money. Well, Mom, it's hard to say. The real estate market's slow these days. But we spoke with a few agents, and they said at most 150 to 200,000. 200 tops. They valued my house, sitting in an up-and-coming neighborhood, with a large yard and well-maintained, at $200,000. When just Anthony's hidden savings account alone was nearly that much. And where do you plan on living? I asked Danielle. Mom, we'll stay at the apartment on Carnegie Avenue. It's small, but enough for the two of us. The very apartment they didn't know belonged to me, where my daughter had been paying rent to me without realizing it. All right, I said, setting my cup down on the table. Let me think about it a bit. Danielle grabbed my hand. There's nothing to think about. Mom, just last week you nearly had a serious fall. If something worse happened, we'd regret it for the rest of our lives. She's right. Mrs. Beth. Richard added, we only want what's best for you. Honestly, this house is far too big. It must be exhausting to keep up with it. I listened to them for another half hour. More reasons about safety. More talk of convenience. No more promises. I'd be happier with people my age. Their entire script was rehearsed. A perfect performance until they asked the question I'd been waiting for. So, Mom, tomorrow, can we schedule a tour of the senior home? That was the moment I decided to end the act. I didn't simply say no in a weak voice. I said it clearly, no. I will not be touring any senior homes. And I will not be leaving this house. The air in the room shifted instantly. Danielle frowned. Richard sat up straight, his back stiffening. Mom, are you being stubborn? Danielle asked. No. Danielle, I am being clear-headed. I rose slowly and walked to my room. When I came back, I carried the folder I had prepared all of Anthony's documents. Neatly organized. I set it down on the coffee table, right on top of their colorful brochures. Before we go any further, there are some things you need to know. I pulled out the first document, the deed to the very house we were sitting in. This house isn't worth $200,000. Richard, it's worth $450,000. According to the appraisal I had done just last week. His eyes widened. But I wasn't finished. And that's not the most interesting part. I laid out the deeds to the parcels outside Akron. These 5 properties are also mine. Each one is currently worth between $80,000 and $100,000. Danielle's face went pale. And there's more. I showed them the business contracts. I am a shareholder in 6 local businesses. Small ones. Yes, but all profitable. I receive dividends every month you can't even imagine. Richard tried to speak, but I cut him off. But the best part is this. I pulled out the building deed. Danielle, the apartment you and Richard live in on Carnegie Avenue is mine. The entire building is mine. You've been paying rent to me for the last 4 years without even knowing it. A heavy silence filled the room. Danielle stared at the papers as if she were seeing a ghost. Richard sat frozen, white as a sheet. This can't be real, he stammered. Oh, but it's very real, I replied, flipping to the last page with my signature and the notary's seal. Everything is legal. Everything belongs to me. Danielle finally spoke. Mom, why did you never tell me? Because I didn't know either. Honey, I only discovered it 2 days ago, while sorting through your father's things. I placed Anthony's letter on the table. He left this. A letter explaining everything he had quietly built over decades to protect us. Richard picked up the letter and began reading. With every line, his face grew tighter. And do you know what else he wrote? I looked straight into Richard's eyes. He suspected you. Richard, He thought it strange that a son-in-law would ask so many questions about finances. Mrs. Beth. Let me finish, I said firmly, without a trace of hesitation. For weeks, you've been pushing me to leave this house, making me believe I was helpless. A burden. That I was losing my mind. Mom. We only wanted no. What you wanted was to get rid of me and take what you thought was my only asset, this house. I gathered the documents and closed the folder. You have no idea you're talking to a woman who owns enough to buy 10 of the nursing homes you're trying to lock me in. Richard tried to recover his fake gentleness. Mrs. Beth. There must be some misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding. Richard. I held his gaze. There's manipulation. There's greed, dressed up as concern. There's a clear scheme to make me believe I can't live my own life anymore. I stood and walked to the living room door. Richard. From now on, you are not allowed in my home. You are officially banned. If you ever come back or try to threaten me in any way, I will call the police. Danielle stood too. Her face torn. Caught between her husband and the truth laid bare. Mom. It doesn't have to be this way. Yes. It does. My daughter. I looked at her. My heart aching. You have a choice. Stay with this greedy man and lose your mother. Or wake up and realize who truly cares for you. Richard fumbled to gather the nursing home brochures. His face restless. Danielle. Let's go. Your mother's not well. I am perfectly well. Richard. In fact, I'm clearer than I've been in months. I opened the living room door. Now get out of my house and don't ever come back. He hesitated a moment. I'm about to say something, but then must have seen in my eyes there was no room for compromise. Danielle. Let's go. My daughter looked at me. Tears streaming down her face. Mom, my girl. My door will always be open to you. Always. But for him, never again. They left in silence. Richard seething, barely containing his anger. Danielle sobbing softly. When the door closed behind them, I sank into the armchair and drew in a long breath. My hands no longer trembled. My heart pounded. But with relief, not fear. For the first time in months, I felt truly free. But I knew it wasn't over. I knew Richard well enough to understand he wouldn't give up so easily. And, unfortunately, I was right. 3 weeks later, I received a subpoena. Richard had filed a petition, accusing me of senile dementia and claiming I needed a guardian. According to him, I was being manipulated and no longer capable of making my own decisions. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in December, at the family court in downtown Cleveland, Ohio. That morning, I wore my finest black dress and the pearl necklace Anthony had given me on our 25th wedding anniversary. I walked the downtown streets toward the courthouse. I was nervous, but full of determination. What Richard didn't know, what no one knew, was that among Anthony's papers was a piece of information that could change everything. Information that would turn that courtroom into the stage for the greatest shock of my life. And when I spoke 3 simple words before the judge, everyone would know, once and for all, who Beth truly was. There are moments in life we never forget. Every detail, every sound, every smell etched as if it were yesterday. The day I stood in court in Cleveland was one of those moments. It was a Thursday in December, one of those strangely hot days before Christmas. The sun blazed bright, but inside me there was a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. I was nervous. No denying that. But I was also full of determination. After weeks of preparation, I knew exactly what I had to do. I woke up early, as usual, brewed a pot of coffee with my old cloth filter, ate a slice of leftover cornbread from the day before. I tried to keep to my daily routine so anxiety wouldn't swallow me whole. But when it came to choosing my outfit, I took longer than usual. I wanted to appear dignified, respectably. I wanted everyone who looked at me to see a serious woman, capable and fully in control of her life. I chose an elegant black dress, the one I wore only for special occasions. The fabric was intact. No stains, no signs of wear. I put on my low-heeled black shoes, both comfortable and graceful. And finally, I clasped the pearl necklace Anthony had given me for our 25th wedding anniversary. It wasn't expensive, not real pearls, but it carried priceless meaning. Every time I wore it, I felt my husband was still beside me. I grabbed the brown leather purse Danielle had once given me for Mother's Day, back when she still saw me as her mother. Not an obstacle. Inside, I had neatly packed every document in a folder. Nothing missing. I left the house at 8 a.m. The hearing was at 10. But I wanted to arrive early, to get familiar with the atmosphere, to calm myself. The courthouse stood downtown, a massive stone building with towering columns and steep steps that made someone like me feel small. On the bus, I gazed out the window, Cleveland waking up, people heading to work, life carrying on as usual. Meanwhile, I, a 64-year-old woman, was on my way to the most important confrontation of my life. When I arrived, the place was already bustling. Lawyers in pressed suits went up and down the stairs. Citizens lined up. Papers rustled. Conversations echoed. High heels clattered across marble floors. I felt tiny amid it all. But I took a deep breath and remembered Anthony's words in his letter. "You are stronger than you think." I found the courtroom. Family court. Hallway 3B. I sat on a bench outside. It was only 8:40. There was still plenty of time. At 9:15, Danielle appeared. She was 5 months pregnant, her rounded belly showing beneath a dark blue dress. When she saw me, she hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to greet me. At last, she stepped closer. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, honey." She sat beside me, but left a space between us. An awkward silence hung heavy. "How are you, Mom?" she asked softly. "I'm fine. And you? How's the baby? Good?" "Mom." She placed her hand instinctively over her belly. "Danielle, there's no need for us to talk about anything now. Let's wait until this is settled here." Richard arrived 5 minutes later, with a lawyer in a gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase. He saw me but didn't greet me, just nodded from a distance. Then began talking with his lawyer in the hallway. I overheard fragments, clear signs of dementia, incapable of managing assets, under someone's influence. At 9:50, a court officer opened the door and called out, "Case number." Plaintiff Richard Miller. Defendant Beth Miller. We entered. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, but no less imposing. The judge's bench sat high above. The U.S. flag hung on the wall. The clerk's desk. The prosecutor's table. Everything solemn. Official. I sat where I was directed. Danielle sat beside me. Richard and his lawyer, across the room. The prosecutor and clerk were present. Only the judge was missing. At exactly 10 o'clock, the back door opened. A court officer announced, "All rise. The judge is entering." Everyone stood. And in that moment, my life veered in a new direction. The man entered, wearing a black robe, files in hand. But then he froze, mid-step, his eyes locking onto me. He stared at me as if he had seen a ghost. His face drained of all color. Then he whispered, barely audible, "It's her." A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Everyone turned to look at me, confused. Richard frowned. His lawyer leaned in to whisper something. Danielle stared at me, bewildered. But I knew exactly who the man was. Among Anthony's papers was a receipt, a record of a generous donation he had once made to a social project led by a retired judge. The project's name was clear: St. Mary's Children's Center. Free support for underprivileged kids in East Cleveland. And the director's name was Henry Moore, the very man standing before me now. Visibly shaken, I slowly rose to my feet, looked him straight in the eyes, and spoke 3 words that froze the entire courtroom. St. Mary's Center. The effect was instant. Judge Henry Moore gripped the bench, his legs trembling slightly. Everyone in the room looked at me as if I had uttered a secret code only he could understand. "Oh, Lord," he whispered. You're Anthony's wife?" "Yes. It's me, Judge Moore." He walked slowly toward his bench, as if everything were happening in slow motion. He sat down. He removed his glasses, wiped them, put them back on, and drew in a deep breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, addressing the room, "before we start this hearing, I need to make something clear." Richard's lawyer shifted uneasily in his chair. "Your Honor, is there some impediment?" "There's no legal impediment, Counselor. But there is a personal matter I must be transparent about." The judge looked at me again, his eyes filled with both respect and emotion. "The defendant in this case, Mrs. Beth Miller, is the widow of a man I consider one of the greatest benefactors I have ever known." The entire room fell silent. 10 years ago, after I had retired and was coordinating social work, I began a project to build a free children's center in East Cleveland. We needed resources. And back then, finding funding for such a thing was nearly impossible. One Tuesday afternoon, her husband, Mr. Anthony, walked into my office. A simple man, wearing a mechanic's uniform, the smell of grease still on him, saying he had heard about the project and wanted to help. Richard turned pale. Danielle's eyes widened in shock. I thought he might give a small donation. Like others, 50, maybe $100. But Mr. Anthony laid an envelope on my desk, and inside was $60,000 in cash. $60,000. I asked him why he was doing this, if he represented a company, or if he wanted public recognition. He answered, "It's for the children. Sir, Beth and I don't have many kids of our own, so we want to help other people's children. But please don't ever mention our names." Tears ran down my face. I had never known about that conversation. Never known Anthony spoke of me that way. The St. Mary's Center was built from the Miller family's money. To this day, it has welcomed over 500 children, providing free education, nutrition, and medical care. The judge stood and stepped closer to me. "Mrs. Beth, I have a photo of you and Anthony in my office, next to the first children the center cared for. All these years, whenever I looked at that picture, I thought, one day, I want to meet this woman and thank her personally for what she and her husband did." He returned to his seat, then fixed his eyes on Richard. "And now, I find that very woman is being accused of senile dementia, deemed incapable of managing her own estate." Richard's lawyer spoke up. "Your Honor, with all due respect, that has no bearing on the defendant's present capacity." "Oh, but it does, Counselor," the judge cut in. "It bears directly. Because if there is one person in this room whose mental capacity I would never doubt, it is the widow of the man who changed the lives of hundreds of poor children." He opened the file and began to read aloud. "The plaintiff alleges that the defendant is under undue influence, no longer able to make decisions regarding her estate, refusing to accept care appropriate for her age, thereby putting her personal safety at risk." He looked up over his glasses, fixing his gaze on Richard. "Mr. Richard, explain to the court what exactly is your interest in this case. Are you the defendant's son?" "No, Your Honor, I'm her son-in-law. Her son-in-law. Then where is the defendant's daughter? What role does she play in this matter? Danielle shifted uncomfortably. Flustered. I'm here. But I don't fully support the petition. I see. So the son-in-law is demanding guardianship of his mother-in-law against the wishes of her own daughter. Richard's lawyer realized the tide was turning against them. Your Honor, the situation is more complex than that. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Beth, can you tell me about your current condition? How is your health? How is your life? Now it was my turn to speak. I rose slowly, looking around the room. Judge Moore, my health is very good. I am 64 years old, and I have taken care of my home by myself for nearly a year since Anthony passed. I rise early, make coffee, chat with my neighbors, go to the market, go to the bank, handle everything on my own. I took the folder out of my bag. As for my ability to manage assets, I brought some documents I'd like to present. I laid out the property deeds, investment papers, and house documents. In addition to the home I live in at Shaker Heights, I own 5 parcels of land in Akron. I am a shareholder in 6 small businesses in the area. And I own an apartment building in downtown Cleveland that provides steady monthly income. The judge examined them carefully. Does Mr. Richard know about these assets? No. Your Honor, he thinks I only own this house, which is why he pressured me to go into a nursing home and sell it. The prosecutor spoke, Your Honor. From what I can see, there is no evidence whatsoever that the defendant is incapacitated. On the contrary, she demonstrates a clear understanding and control of both her assets and her life. The judge nodded. Mr. Richard, do you have any medical evidence? Any psychiatric reports proving the dementia you allege? No, Your Honor, but any witnesses who can confirm the defendant has been confused or incoherent. Well, she did fall at home once. A fall. The judge turned to me. Can you explain? I slipped off a stool while changing a light bulb. Your Honor, something I've done for decades. I only ended up with a small bruise on my arm. The judge closed the file. Ladies and gentlemen, after hearing both sides and reviewing the documents presented, it is clear there is no basis whatsoever for guardianship. The defendant is fully competent, capable of managing her property and her personal life independently. Richard fidgeted nervously in his chair. Not only that, the judge continued, but I have serious concerns about the true motives behind this petition. I am requesting the prosecutor's office investigate the possibility of attempted elder financial exploitation. The prosecutor scribbled something in his notebook. The request for guardianship was denied. The defendant retained full civil rights over all matters of her life, and I ordered the plaintiff to bear all court costs. When the judge's gavel came down, I felt an indescribable relief. But he wasn't finished yet. Mrs. Beth, would you give me a few minutes in private after the hearing? I would very much like to talk with you about your late husband and about the Children's Center. Of course. Judge Moore. The hearing was over. Richard stormed out angrily. Followed by his lawyer, Danielle walked up to me, tears brimming in her eyes. Mom, forgive me. I've been so foolish. I let that man blind me. And I couldn't see who you really are. I embraced my daughter right there in the courtroom. You are forgiven, sweetheart. But now you must choose. You must decide what truly matters to you. I walked out of the courthouse, victorious but not vengeful. The true victory wasn't in winning the case. It was in reclaiming my dignity, my right to live my own life. It was in realizing that I had never been the weak, dependent woman they wanted me to believe I was. And most of all, it was discovering that recognition, respect, and admiration can come from the most unexpected places, at moments you least expect them. That day, in the Cleveland courthouse, 3 simple words changed everything. Not only the outcome of the hearing, but also the way I saw myself. At 64, I realized my life was only beginning, and sometimes, the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. There is a very particular feeling when you walk away from a battle you never wanted, but were forced to fight to protect your dignity. It's like a weight you didn't even know you carried, suddenly vanishing from your shoulders. And you can finally breathe deeply for the first time in months. That's exactly how I felt stepping out of the Cleveland courthouse on that Thursday in December. The sun was high. The heat intense. But this time, I felt no chill twisting in my stomach. I walked through the downtown streets, head high, shoulders straight, clutching my brown leather purse as though it held the most precious treasure in the world, and in a way, it did. Inside were the documents proving my competence, my clarity, my independence. But above all, they were proof that it is never too late to discover who you truly are. My private conversation with Judge Henry Moore lasted nearly an hour. He showed me photos of the St. Mary's Children's Center, told me stories of the kids whose lives had been transformed by the project my Anthony once supported. In his eyes, I saw a deep, genuine gratitude, a respect that moved me more than words can say. Mrs. Beth, he said before I left, I hope you understand how much your family has done for this community. Your husband wasn't just a benefactor. He was a man of vision. And by the way you carried yourself today, I can see clearly that the two of you truly were meant for each other. On the way back home to Shaker Heights, I stopped at a little diner near downtown. I ordered a café au lait and a slice of cheesecake. Simple things. But in that moment, they tasted like freedom. Sitting at a marble-top table, watching people pass by, I finally had time to reflect on everything that had just happened. Richard had left the courthouse defeated and humiliated. His plan to lock me away in a nursing home and take my house had completely collapsed. More than that, now he was under investigation by the prosecutor's office for attempted elder financial exploitation. The legal consequences could be serious. But what weighed most on my heart was Danielle. My daughter had walked out of court in tears, clearly torn between the husband she had chosen and the mother she had just rediscovered. 5 months pregnant, she would now have to make difficult choices for her future, for herself, and for the child she carried. I arrived home around 3 p.m. The house was quiet, but no longer with the heavy silence of the past months. It was the peaceful stillness of someone who had finally found her place in the world. I made my afternoon coffee, cut a slice of leftover cornbread, and sat on the back porch. The garden needed tending. The grass was tall. Some plants wilted from the December sun. But I saw potential. I saw a garden that could bloom again. A yard that could be used in ways I had never thought of before. For 2 days, I lived in a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I returned to my daily routines, but with an entirely new perspective. I woke early. Not out of duty, but out of joy. I made coffee. Not just from habit, but because I loved the ritual. I talked with neighbors. Not to pass the time, but because I cherished those simple, genuine connections. Mrs. Johnson from number 47 noticed the change immediately. Beth, you look like someone who just won the lottery, she said when we met on the sidewalk that Saturday morning. In a way, I did. Mrs. Johnson, I found back pieces of myself I had once forgotten. And what about Danielle? I haven't seen her around in a while. It was an innocent question, but it struck a tender spot. Danielle hadn't appeared since the hearing. No calls. No messages. I knew she was struggling, standing between her husband and her family, but I still missed her. Especially now that I understood more clearly the challenges she would face, not just as a woman, but as a single mother if she chose to leave Richard. She's going through some things. Mrs. Johnson, But she'll be all right. If you need anything, anything at all, just call me. We'll help each other. On Sunday morning, I heard the doorbell. It was only 8 a.m., an unusual time for visitors. When I opened the door, Danielle stood there, alone, holding a small suitcase. Her eyes red from crying. "Mom," she choked out. "Can I come in?" "Of course. Sweetheart. This will always be your home." She stepped in slowly, as if asking permission with each step. Set the suitcase down on the living room floor. Then looked at me with eyes filled with shame, sadness, and hope. "Mom, let me apologize properly. I'm sorry for what I did. For what I allowed to happen. For ever doubting you." I pulled her into my arms before she could finish. I felt her body trembling, the weight of her pregnant belly between us, the familiar scent of the shampoo she'd used since her teenage years. "You are already forgiven. Danielle, don't torment yourself any longer." "No. Mom, I need to say it. Because I know you raised me to be better than this. Not to be manipulated. To think for myself." We walked into the kitchen together. I boiled water, made coffee. Danielle sat in the chair she used to sit in every morning before school. For a moment, it felt as though time had rewound, and she was once again my little girl, needing comfort and guidance from her mother. "Tell me what happened," I said, setting a café au lait in front of her. "I left home Thursday right after the hearing. I couldn't look at Richard anymore after learning what he'd done. How he used me to hurt you." She took a sip of coffee and sighed. "I've been staying with Emily, my college friend. She's letting me use her living room until I can figure things out. But Mom, I'm scared. I'm 5 months pregnant. I haven't had steady work for 2 years. I don't have savings. And Richard, didn't he try to stop you? Of course. He told me I was being emotional, that I'd regret it, that I couldn't raise a child on my own." She paused, then continued, "But in that moment, I thought of you. I remembered how you raised me almost entirely on your own. Because Dad was always so busy working. And look how I turned out. You grew up strong, smart. You just lost your way for a while, but that can happen to anyone. Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Sweetheart, can I come back here?" "Not forever. Just until the baby is born and I get back on my feet. I promise I won't be a burden. I'll help with the house. Danielle." I interrupted, placing my hand over hers on the table. "You don't need permission to come back home. This will always be your home." She burst into tears, not the muffled sobs of the past few days, but the breaking cry of someone who had finally found safe harbor in the middle of a storm. I helped Danielle carry her suitcase back to her old room. Everything was just as she had left it years ago: the single bed, the wooden dresser, the bookshelf, and a few teenage trinkets. It would be the place for her to put her life back in order, to think about the future, to prepare for motherhood. "Mom," she said as she opened her suitcase, "there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" "Honey, the truth is, I've suspected for a while that Richard hasn't been honest about some things. He always dodged when I asked about the future, about our plans once the baby came." I sat down beside her bed. "What do you mean?" He kept talking about financial security, about stability. But he never wanted to go into detail. And when he started pushing to send you to a nursing home, I realized he cared more about that than he ever did about me. He was the one who brought it up, the one who found the places, the one who kept pressing. And you never questioned him. I did. But he always said it was for me. Because I worried about you. That he only wanted what was best for the family. I was so naive. Mom. Or maybe I just didn't want to face the truth. What matters is you saw it before it was too late." Danielle instinctively rested her hand on her belly. A protective gesture. Mom, I'm scared I can't handle it. I'm scared of raising a child alone. Was scared I don't have the foundation. My girl. You have more foundation than you think. You have education. You have intelligence. You have character, and most importantly, you are not alone. You still have me. With the ability and the experience to help both you and my grandchild. That was the first time I brought up my financial situation with Danielle since the discovery. I saw relief, mixed with curiosity, flicker in her eyes. Mom, all those assets you showed in court, were they really all from Dad? Yes. Honey, your father had more foresight than we ever realized. I told her about the letter, about the land, about the building she had once lived in, while unknowingly paying rent to me. I explained the investments in small businesses, the savings account I myself hadn't known existed. So that means you really are wealthy. It means I'll never have to depend on anyone to live with dignity, and it means I can help you and my grandchild have a good life. That Sunday afternoon, for the first time in months, I felt my family was being rebuilt on solid ground, not on dependency or manipulation, but on respect, honesty, and genuine love. Danielle stayed with me that night. We cooked a simple dinner, watched TV together, and talked about plans for the baby. It felt like we were making up for the lost years that had slipped away in the chaos of adult life. Before going to bed, she suddenly asked me a question that caught me off guard. Mom, do you have any plans for yourself, now that you know about Dad's assets? Do you want to do something different with your life? A simple question, but one that struck deep inside me. For decades, I had lived the life circumstances demanded: wife, mother, homemaker, the kind neighbor, always reacting, never initiating, always living by the needs of others, never pursuing my own dreams. But now, at 64, with financial independence secured and the wisdom only time can grant, maybe it was finally time to discover what I truly wanted to do with the rest of my life. You know what I answered. I think it's time to find out who Beth really is, the woman who never had the chance to exist before now. And so began the second act of my life. Not at 40, as people like to say, but at 64, when I finally understood it is never too late to begin again. 6 months after that kitchen conversation with Danielle, my life had transformed in ways I had never imagined. June came, and the soft Cleveland winds carried with them a sense of renewal, perfectly mirroring the changes happening within me. Danielle gave birth at the end of March to a beautiful, healthy baby girl named Serena. As my daughter said, she had brought peace back into our lives after so much turmoil. Serena was born right at home on a Saturday morning, with sunlight streaming through the bedroom window while a light spring rain fell outside. Becoming a grandmother at 65 was a life-changing experience. Holding that tiny baby in my arms, breathing in the unmistakable scent of new life, seeing in her eyes the continuation of our family, all of it gave me an entirely new perspective on what truly matters in life. Richard tried filing a few lawsuits in desperation during the first months after the hearing, but he soon gave up when he realized he had no chance. The prosecutor's office investigation into his attempted elder financial exploitation was moving forward, and he chose to completely back out of the situation. Danielle, meanwhile, finalized her divorce without much difficulty, and he rarely asked about his daughter again. But the most important change in my life happened 3 months after Serena was born. That was when I made the most significant decision of my 64 years to turn part of the assets Anthony left behind into something that could help other women who were facing the same circumstances I once endured. The idea came during a conversation with Judge Henry Moore. He had reached out to me about expanding a community preschool in Columbus, and while we spoke, he mentioned the alarming number of elder financial abuse cases brought to court. Mrs. Beth, he said, The number of families trying to exploit the elderly is frightening. And most of the victims don't have the means or knowledge to defend themselves the way you did. That was the moment the idea for the Beth Carter House was born, a project I had never imagined I could start, let alone carry on my own. I used one of the parcels of land outside Cleveland to build a shelter for older women victims, not only of physical abuse, but especially of emotional and financial abuse. The kind of silent violence that convinces people they are no longer capable of living independently. The center could host up to 15 women temporarily while they rebuilt their lives legally and emotionally. There were private rooms, a common room, a small library, a garden for therapeutic activities, but most importantly, a multidisciplinary team: psychologists, social workers, lawyers, all working together to restore what many had lost faith in themselves. Danielle, who had a degree in education but had never practiced, became the project's education coordinator. We held basic computer classes, financial management workshops, and discussion groups about the rights of older adults. It was deeply moving to see women arrive at the center with slumped shoulders, believing they were a burden, only to leave months later with their dignity restored and plans for a new life. The first woman we welcomed was Mrs. Constance, 71 years old. Her children had pressured her to sell her house to split the money. And when she refused, they cut her off completely, both emotionally and financially. She came to us through a neighborhood clinic nurse who had noticed signs of depression and abandonment. Mrs. Beth. She wept on her first day. I don't understand why my children treat me this way. I raised them with all my love. Mrs. Constance. I replied. The fault is not yours. The fault lies with a society that has taught people to see the elderly as a burden, as an obstacle standing in the way of wealth. We stood by her side for 4 months. She regained her self-respect. She'd learned how to use a computer to stay in touch with distant friends, and discovered rights she had never known she had. When she left the Beth Carter House, she was already planning to visit a cousin in Pennsylvania she had lost contact with for decades. In just 2 years of operation, we had supported 127 women. Each story was different, but they all shared one truth: they had once been made to believe their social worth had run out, that they had nothing left to give. The project slowly gained recognition. Social workers from other cities came to learn from us. Local newspapers published articles of praise. Even universities reached out, eager to study positive aging and elder rights. But the most meaningful acknowledgement came from a place I never expected. One morning in September, nearly a year after the center opened, I received a phone call that moved me to tears. It was from one of the very first children ever welcomed by the community preschool my husband had helped build, now a 23-year-old woman, a nursing graduate. Mrs. Beth, she said. My name is Carla. You don't know me, but I want to thank you. I learned that you and your husband helped build the school where I studied as a child. Now, I'm a nurse, with a stable job and a decent life, and I want to contribute to your project. Carla became a volunteer nurse with us, providing basic health care for the women at the center, and she brought along many other young people who had once been students at that preschool. It was a circle of kindness Anthony could never have imagined when he quietly made that donation so many years ago. Now, at 69, I wake up every morning with a clear purpose, not only to care for my home, for my granddaughter Serena, for my daughter Danielle, but also for the women depending on our project. Lives waiting to be changed. Serena, now 4 years old, often comes with me to the Beth Carter House. She plays in the garden, chats with the grandmas staying there, and gifts them her little drawings. She is growing up in an environment where multiple generations are seen as a precious asset, where caring for one another is the most important value of all. Danielle remarried last year, in this time to a man who truly values her and loves Serena as his own daughter. They live in a small house, just 2 blocks from me in Shaker Heights, close enough for us to stay connected, but far enough for each household to have its own space. As for me, I've never considered remarrying. Not out of sorrow or fear, but because I've discovered a wholeness within myself I never knew before. I've come to understand that I can be happy in my own companionship, that I have the strength and the resources to build a meaningful life without depending on anyone else. Many people ask if I regret not discovering Andrew's assets sooner, or if I resent him for keeping the secret so long. But the truth is, I completely understand him. He wanted to protect me from the pressure and responsibility that comes with money. And above all, he wanted to make sure everything was secure and stable before handing it over to me. What Andrew never realized was that I had the strength not only to manage what he left behind, but to expand it into something that benefits many others. That I was capable not only of preserving, but of creating a legacy of my own. Because sometimes, the people who seem the weakest are the ones who are truly the strongest. And sometimes, the greatest lesson we can give is to prove that it is never too late to discover your real strength, to turn pain into purpose, experience into wisdom, and wisdom into action that inspires the world. If this story touched your heart, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. If you were in my place, what would you do? Who knows, your words might brighten someone's day. NT.